Hello and welcome back to the Gross Minute. I'm your host, Kevin Gross, and today we are joined by Dr. Tom Broussard.
How you doing, Kevin? Good to see you.
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
That's good. All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a treat. Dr. Tom Broussard is a family friend, relative, and someone who is active in the aphasia community. Tom, could you please do our listeners a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned before, we're part of our family, really. I'll call you my nephew. Um, Also a shipmate. So we're both in the Navy, and that's always a good thing to know. But yeah, good old Navy for sure.
There we go. Go
Well,
Navy.
go Navy. The short story, the elevator speech would be that I grew up outside of Philly, went to Naval Academy, graduated in 1973, went to my first ship, which is a destroyer, as an engineer, was there for 3 years, then went into supply corps school. I wanted to learn more about business, and then went into submarines. And I was on a missile boat for 2 tours, then a submarine tender in New London, and then uh, shore duty in Pennsylvania. Again, to go a lot further along quickly, since I'm old and this would take forever, ended up, at- obviously now talking about stroke and aphasia, we ended up moving to outside of Boston to Waltham, Massachusetts. I ended up becoming an associate dean at the Heller School, part of Brandeis, a graduate school, part of Brandeis. Worked there for 5 years till I had my first stroke in 2011. So that's how it really all started. And I ended up with this thing called aphasia, which again, we had no idea what that meant. And a lot of people just don't know. So that's how I got better over time. And as I got better, and it took about 3 to 4 years, then I started writing about it, speaking about it, and helping other people who also had stroke and aphasia. And I found out why that is, the fact that we don't know much about aphasia in our country, even though there's 2.6 million people in our country that have stroke and aphasia. So that's how it all started. And now it's been 14 years, doing a lot of work working on stroke and aphasia. So that's the short story.
And for some people who are wondering, what
Hmm.
exactly is aphasia? How does that affect you?
Aphasia is typically it's otherwise called a language disorder. When it happens in the brain, it's typically on the left side in the Broca's area or anywhere around. And I say 99% of people have it in the left side in the language center. And as a result, people with aphasia have lost their ability to read, write, and speak well. So that is this language disorder. In my particular case, I could not read, write, or speak well. And being a dean, obviously, I lost my job because I just couldn't do it anymore, which is sort of terrible. But I did get better over time. And that turns out to be those are the skills that we all need to be able to live in life, is having our language. And unfortunately, people with aphasia end up losing one component or another or all three going forward. So that's what aphasia is. We say most people with aphasia got it from a stroke. There are other ways you can have aphasia. You can really just be hit badly, by even a car accident, a tumor. People said getting hit by a horse. We actually have one person who got hit by a horse.
So it has to do with serious brain trauma of some kind, whether it be an injury or, like you said, the majority of the time brought on by stroke.
It's true. And typically, because of the stroke, to get a little bit further, when you have a stroke, typically, there's any number of reasons, but among them is when the part of those arteries are clogged with cholesterol. And as a result, it stops sending blood further on down. So it blocks it, blocks the blood, that blocks the oxygen. At that point, the follow on cells can't breathe anymore. It can't live anymore. So as a result, within a minute or beyond, a lot of those downstreamed cells start to die. So if you lose hundreds of millions of or even billions of cells, then if they happen to be in this particular area, although there's a lot of the brain uses all of it, but especially in the left side, then that's where it impacts the language the most when you have it in that area.
And this is really important because, like you said, I mean, everyone needs to communicate. We need to communicate to
Mm.
get through life. Would you say one of the largest impacts that happened immediately for you after you were out of the hospital and had to try and figure out what your next steps were? One of the consequences essentially was that you said you lost your job as dean at the.
Yeah, yeah, yes. When you end up with aphasia, typically the first thing is you've lost your job. If you get it back, depending, if your company happens to have really good insurance and they're really happy people that want you to stay, they'll hold on to you as long as they can. But yes, lose your job. Often you often lose your friendship because a lot of people, they don't even know who you used to be. So they go, who is this guy Tom? I mean, I don't want to. A lot of people, myself probably too, before my stroke, you really end up saying, "Well, I don't even know this person anymore." So you lose a lot of friendship as well. And then, of course, depending on the family or community support, that also is another issue too. If you just don't have enough support that you need, maybe you get to therapy, maybe you just stay at home. Maybe it's 150 miles to the hospital for your rehab. So people just stay at home. So you still don't know what this aphasia really is, since it's not really readily available on the website. Although you can put in aphasia and it'll start to tell you, but you have to know what that means. So you have to at least know, okay, I have this aphasia. Maybe I should put in these letters and something will appear and I begin to understand it. But then even I couldn't do it, right? I couldn't do it. So your family would have to do it. Now you're back to the support. Is there a group in your area? Who knows? So, and the fact that a lot of hospitals, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but awful lot of hospitals, most hospitals do not even use the word aphasia on their website. So you put all that together, and that continues to be one of the biggest things, not being able to communicate. That's a big deal. But then unable to communicate with other people who are there able to help you with that, it all sort of breaks down at that point. So it's a terrible disorder. We call it disease sometimes, but it's a disorder. But it's terrible. I've met people over my work who were mute and sometimes stay mute for years. But I've also met people with who were mute at the beginning, and then they got 20 words, and then 100 words, and then 1,000 words, and it took them years to get to having a decent conversation. But yeah, it does take a lot of work to rebuild your language.
Then I would say it's quite remarkable that you and I are having this conversation here as we are able to.
Yeah, I was lucky. Uh, the I always say I'm lucky, and then people say, "Well, it wasn't really luck." I'll say, "Okay, it wasn't luck. It was my habit to do certain things because of my job and because of what I used to be before the stroke." But I call it lucky because since I didn't know what this thing was, and I didn't know what recovery would look like, or I didn't even know what how I would get better. And they weren't really helpful about telling me other than just starting with my own habit. So I had just finished my PhD, a research PhD at the Heller School 5 years before, right? So I was still working on what my research question would be. Obviously, it took me 6 years, so it takes 6 years of work to do what I did as a researcher. I thought, well, I'll just continue to do what I used to do, and I'll find out more about this thing called aphasia. Started to actually look at the world around me because there were some things knew what they were, but I didn't know what they were, and I didn't know how to pronounce them or know what they were, or write them down. I
Mm,
thought, well, I'll just start keeping track of my life. And I started keeping what turned out to be a 500-page diary. Again, even me not knowing that for the first 200 pages, the text, the words didn't make any sense.
mm,
But I didn't know that.
okay.
Again,
Wow.
it's only later that I can go back and I'll tell you I got better because of this and other things, and I'll talk about them, but especially with the writing, it's the activity itself. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. It's the activity itself because the way the brain is made and the additional healthy cells have that capacity. You can't grow new cells, but you can grow new, what's called dendrites and synapses, but they're otherwise metaphorically branches and leaves. You grow more of those with the remaining healthy cells and you grow more and more and more and more. And then they start to connect with other cells And that is where language flows. So, again, me not knowing any of that, I just started writing badly for the first 200 pages. It was 11 months later, while writing it, I felt another click in my head. I literally felt a click in my head. I was at the library writing in my diary and I felt it. And I said, "Oh my, I felt it." And I went back
Wow.
and looked at my first entry in my diary. I pointed at it and said, "Oh my God, who wrote that? It's
Wow.
awful." And that was me. And I went, "Wait a minute." I knew I had written it, but that's the first time I knew that what I was writing didn't make any sense. So as fast as I could, at 11 months, 15 pages, I said, "I'm telling the world as fast as I can. If I don't write this down, the world will forget it in a minute if I don't keep track and let you know that my eyes have risen to a new altitude and I can see things that I hadn't seen before." So I
That's
wrote that as fast as I could. And then I continued to write that for another 300 pages because then I knew that whatever I had done, that's why it becomes accidental. I was just doing it. And it turns out the best therapy you can have. But
mhm,
again, nobody told me to do that. Had my therapist, great therapist. I got 15 hours from a great therapist doing the various quizzes and tasks that they do. But that's it. Twice a week for 30 minutes each for 30 sessions. Again, by the time I got to the end, I realized, oh, this is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And these 15 hours with this person does nothing more nor less than help steer us in the right direction. Because after that, it's still up to you. You have to do it.
mhm.
And then I started recording with my iPhone, started recording myself while walking around town and writing. And then when I began to realize, of course, I didn't tell you why I had the stroke. I had open heart surgery 3 months before my stroke. And then 3 months later, ended up with the stroke after my heart surgery. And so I had to walk a lot for my heart issues.
Okay.
So while walking and looking at signs on the street, then
Mhm.
I could tell what I could or couldn't read, and that too
Oh,
is important to me. It turns out to be these various language modalities. Each one of these have to be exercised on a regular basis. So it just by accident, I was writing, listening, viewing, seeing. Again, I tell the therapist now, tell your people to do these things every single day. You do it enough, and eventually I mentioned we grew lots, obviously grew millions and millions of branches and leaves and started to connect and finally it flowed.
wow.
So all of that is really how the process works in
Wow.
general.
That that really is something. And that's the process of how the brain starts to relearn those things. But I think it's important that we talk about the road to recovery, as
Mhm.
it were. When I'm looking at your story and how you're able to go from not being able to understand words, not being able to speak and hold on a conversation, even like you said, writing very badly until one day it just kind of clicked for you. What types of things does it really require? You said some of the practical things were writing, speaking, and actually trying to continue to do what you had done before. But if you have this situation where your
Mhm.
life changes entirely, you weren't necessarily sure about who Tom was before this. That click that you had actually felt was a part of that you? Like, did you feel like you felt you coming back a little bit there?
When it happened, it was instantaneously. While I was in a library and there was nobody there, I was looking at all the books in front of me. And while I was writing, I felt that click, quickly went and pointed at it. At that point, I said, "Oh my God, clearly I was unaware before, and I can see unawareness is leaving and awareness is coming in." So I actually, there was no video there, but I was doing exactly this. I said it to myself, "Oh, I see. Unawareness is leaving, and I can see awareness is coming in." So literally, there was a physical activity that happened at that moment in time on the inside. Clearly, that enough of those cells came together, enough of those branches and leaves came together. And clearly, at that point, I was now aware what I was not aware before. And I wrote that down as fast as I could. That ends with my first book at 11 months. The stroke was in September. and the following year was August while writing that it happened. But you mentioned earlier you happen to do the things that you quote used to do. Tell me more about that. Is what you were asking. Of course, the therapist will tell you that you need. I have these 5 rules about recovery. Motivation. Absolutely, you have to be motivated. If you're not motivated, you're not going to move as much as you need to. Number 2, practice. Number 3, practice. Number 4, practice. Number 5, practice. So it's all about motivation and practice. I've been told many times by the therapists themselves that they have lots of their customers who are not motivated. All the many people at stroke and aphasia with whom I have met over the years, they too are motivated enough to actually be there themselves, right? They might not be motivated enough to do the practice. They used to have to do the various word lists that they had to try to say or write them down or insert one letter to make it into a word. And people, you get bored. You just sometimes don't want to care, but you have to be motivated enough to be in the same room. And then you have to practice. And practice isn't just do that homework tonight for 20 minutes and come back tomorrow. This is coming to understand that all of these activities are highly therapeutic. So it almost as if you don't have to quote practice, you just to do what you used to do. And yes, if it doesn't feel good, you cannot read. I was reading books and I couldn't understand them. Okay. It turns out for me, I started seeing signs on the street and they were one word. I could understand that one word. Sometimes there were 2 letters. Speed limit, I could understand that. But there were
Mhm.
3 or more, all of a sudden it would fall apart and I could not understand what was in front of my head. But as long as you kept looking for the table of contents, the title of a book, oh, I understand what is, right? So,
Mhm.
um, the all of these are activities that need to be, quote, practice, but
Mhm.
forget if you don't happen to like that, just say, what did you used to do? Did you used to read books? Did you like to go out for a walk? Did you like to record and listen to yourself talking to friends or family? All of that was the practice that is needed. And in my case, it just happened to be who I used to be before. And that is when I started talking with my friends with stroke and aphasia to always ask them, what did you used to do that made you successful before your stroke? I do tell the therapist to do that too, because they know you have to be motivated, but they can't tell you to be motivated. You have to ask questions that draw out of them what made you motivated before your stroke. So tell me who you were. A lot of them don't really ask that question. Nobody asked me, were you in the Navy or not? Were you an engineer or not? They just think they haven't thought like that as if it was me telling them. You need to ask these questions. So biggest question is, who were you before? Tell me. Tell me. We have time. Give me those few minutes. Tell me what you used to do and what had made you successful in your life to this point. Again, since they're in that room, they were successful at one thing or another, right? The best trash connector, and I've met some people that even do that for their work, and they are really good at it. Well, darn, people that are really good at trash collectors, they are really good. And nobody should be damning them for go do something else, learn something new. They happen to be really good at that. And they're good at customer service and other kinds of other transferable skills. So I did ask all of my people, tell me what made you motivated before, and then think your way through that and use that same motivation now when it comes time after the stroke and aphasia to realize that that motivation and practice of life is therapeutic, and that is how you get better over time. Just takes a long time. I met one person, the longest one I've ever known, 27 years, and she was mute for the first 5 years. She was young, but eventually college, married, kids, and now a professional. But I've been in presentation where she makes the presentation. I
Yeah.
think 27 years,
But she
5
was
years.
mute for 5 years.
Mm,
That really is
yeah,
something. And
that
that
is something,
and that is a person who had this life-altering trauma and
right?
then did what was necessary to overcome it to then have not just a normal life, but a successful life, a beautiful
Right, right.
Wow.
Yep.
And that kind of thing isn't possible if the person who has this life altering experience doesn't start the process by looking at where they are, seeing where they want to be, and then start to practice doing those things. I'm curious though, if a person is mute, at what point can you ask them the question, what did you do before this that made you successful?
So if we're talking now, he asks me a question, I say, and then they go, they did that with body language, and with the body language they were, and they could still do things. So this one guy had a mute. We played cards, and he was always winning. And
Uh-huh.
we said, how can this be? We said it out loud, right? And
Okay.
and we said, but you're winning. And he was looking at us, him,
Eh,
and you can tell even by his. And we said, but how does that work? And he goes, but he was winning and he was still mute. Now, of course, by then he knew a few more words. His wife would come in his wheelchair, bring him there, get to the door, and she would leave for an hour or two and then come back. And he would come every time, weekly, and we end up playing poker more times because he was so damn good. We said, we got to understand how this works, that you are doing it. And even then, he was able to go, not sure, type of thing. But when you do the one, then the brain goes, not sure. It's starting to say, oh, what other things that I used to say that have the same phonemes of not sure. N O, so that the brain starts to inventory and starts to build things together that they can build up from there. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. But of course, he was motivated. But I think once he got there, it's his first time coming, and he was so damn good. We said, "Well, you got to come back."
yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, how do you like
That was
that guy?
probably just fun anyhow, right?
It was. Actually, I wrote an article about various card games that we played. I don't have it with me, and I don't know if I used his name, but he was one of the group, and it was very funny because all of us were learning with our own deficits. So everybody had their own deficits, of one thing or another, and we all knew who the other one was because we had been told or from our notes or whatever. And I wrote an article about it because it was so darn funny. It was hilarious.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's very, very cool. So, people who are recovering from stroke and aphasia have to practice, but it's not just practicing with whatever therapists say, here's your homework, things of that nature. You have to get together with other people. There becomes this community aspect. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the when it comes to therapy for people with stroke and aphasia, the first step, if you're able even to get to that first step, is with an individual therapist, speech language pathology, and then, as it were, leaving the therapist, um, urge them to go to groups in your area, wherever that might be. And again, this is where motivation comes from because uh, in my state, we have about 1,000 people in our biggest town have a stroke once a year or so. So that means about 200 to 250 or more have aphasia. Well, every year there's several hundreds of people with aphasia in our town, um, and yet in that particular town, there aren't any stroke and aphasia groups. In our town, which is close by, we had one for a long time. It fell apart, maybe during COVID. And since then, I've spoken there many times. I have another one coming up in March next year, and they can't even find them anymore. I'm thinking, you mean I've been there when there's nobody there but the therapist? I show up, nobody there.
Wow.
Last time I was there were two or three, and often with caregivers. So when it comes to motivation or even more directions, if you have from your hospital 300 every year, need to go into groups. If you're discharged, you go to then you leave there. Where do you go? To be a robust set of community meetings in that town and have them going through that pipeline of therapy, the continuity of care. So yes, that's a big issue because the communication for the community groups is very important because then we know who each other is. These
Mhm.
people, they drop us off and we're happy. Go do your thing. Over here, we're going to figure this out. And we have fun and we explain to ourselves as best we can. But this is all part of that practice of speaking and listening with the group and going to other social things like going to museums or restaurants, doing all those kinds of things. But you need to make them and then keep it going with these groups. And in our country now, we have about a quarter of a million every year have aphasia or so.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet you there ain't a quarter of a million people in groups.
Right.
Um, that's the
Wow.
deal. That's the deal. The, but the system needs to make it happen. And that requires more resources and it requires more work from these hospitals who I mentioned before in their website don't even have the word aphasia in their website. Yeah, we long, long, long way to go when it comes to aphasia awareness.
So when you're working with other people here, regardless of whether or not they are brand new to the groups or
Mm,
if they've been there like you have, like you said, for years and years, this is something that you have to keep doing, right? I mean, this is something that it now becomes like a way of life. And the people that you work with, it's not just you helping them, they're helping you too, right? I think if I understand this correctly, when you are trying to speak with someone, not only are you practicing your communication and you're speaking, but you then listen to them and you're helping them while they help you. Is that not right?
absolutely. The people with stroke and aphasia are as much a teacher as they are a student on any given day because when we listen, which we do with everybody else who's in the group, we make sure that everybody gets their chance to talk. Um, and listen to what they're saying, then you learn from that because they'll explain why they are or aren't doing what they want to do or haven't been able to do or are getting worse, not better. Why is that, etc. Then in any group, if it's 2 or 20 or 200, then others can chime in and then start sharing. Well, I went through something similar to this. And like you say, keep the group running because then as we quote all get older, like me, um, then yes, we need the newbies to come in and also stay and help all of us again as they also progress. So I know in my particular group in Boston, I've been with that group for 14 years and I'm telling people that I'm old enough that I'm losing my language like I normally do. You know, you get old. You can't really find that word quickly. You can't pronounce it like you used to. If you want to, you have to work on that.
Mhm.
Um, and so I have to work also knowing that if I was just a normal person, of course, I wouldn't have known that a normal person, you lose a certain amount of cells every day. I wouldn't have known that except now that I had what I have with aphasia. I realize had these problems with aphasia that I still had to work on to make my diction better, my understanding better. But now, unfortunately, I'm still losing cells, not because of the stroke, but because that's what they do. So all of us get to share, and then others go, "Oh, you mean that's coming for us?" And yes, here's other things you can do to continue to practice, basically therapeutically, activity that will still forestall the otherwise natural degradation of your cells. So yes, even though mine is going down, I work hard to keep new ones up because you can still build new dendrites and synapses, even if some of the others are too old. The cells are just too old and they give up. But the remaining cells, you can continue to build them up as well. Yeah, I know it's pretty crazy.
Wow, I think that the brain is an amazing thing. The fact that it can
It is.
recover from such, it's like,
It is.
wow. What that tells me is that there is almost nothing that we can't come back from as humans. Like our capacity to bounce back from serious traumas and especially when it has to do with the brain, it's so resilient in many ways.
It is an amazing device. I have a friend, I call him quite famous. He actually, as a young person, lost half of his brain, particular disease. Lost
Okay.
half of it, gone. You can see from his X-ray, you can see dark, light, the whole deal. He Now he's 40 something, and I think it happened with him when he was 17, 18. His name is David, and I met him several times, and he communicates well. And he say, "How do you do this with just half the brain?" As if it was a joke. He goes,
Ah,
"Oh, what can I tell you? The brain is so amazing that even we have this thing called the Broca's area, and that's the language center. Well, believe it or not, we also have the analogous Broca's area here too, except it's not been used that way. You know,
uh-huh.
monkeys, actually, chimpanzees, others have similar. They have a certain number. If it's I don't know, let's call it F5 or something, but they do talk about that. Different from this, but this would have to be completely remade. And clearly, and I forget which one he has that lost half of it. Well, had to have been this side, um, because he had to grow additional mass of dendrites and synapses on that side to now be able to speak. And if you were talking to him now, you would go, "Wow, this is amazing." So yes, as you mentioned, amazing.
Wow, that's an incredible story. It's miraculous. I wouldn't know what other word
Yeah,
to use.
yeah. There's a book you can read it. David Dow.
Okay. Wow. All
Mhm.
right. I'll check that out. It also really seems like we need each other. And I don't mean just people who have lost half their brain or who have lost their ability to speak because of, a stroke and aphasia or serious head trauma, but anyone who's going through anything could really use the help of someone else. If you didn't have someone to help you from the hospital, from that very first point, then, fast forward to through your therapy, and then after that, how you were able to work with other people, or how you have been working with other people who are going through the same things that you've gone through. Would any recovery ever even be possible if we didn't have other people to help us out along the way and us to help them?
Yeah, it's probably just like whenever we talk about sports, high school, college sports, it has to do with more than just you on your own. You have your parents, yes, therapists if you have an issue, but then you have your teachers, you have your coaches, you have ministers, you have priests. I mean, you have a lot of people who are in the caring community who are interested and want to help other humans to meet whatever the challenges might be going forward, even if they're not terrible things, just, how do you learn a new language or a new math or whatever, uh, that all of these people are in that place to help others going forward. So yes, it's not at all unlike people who need that, who are otherwise healthy, and they're also not much different either from other issues of health issues like than AA community, where similar things happen, where you do need help from others.
100%, 100%. As a recovering alcoholic myself, you know, I absolutely benefited from the community aspect of
Mhm.
working with other people who are in recovery. And every day, there's usually at least one thing, whether it's through some type of social media or a message to someone else or from someone else, there's some kind of a reminder that,
Mm.
I'm not in this thing alone. I'm not the only person who's dealing with this type of thing. And, there are other people out there who could also use help and reassurance. And I
Yeah.
mean, whether it's just reassurance, a little bit of that motivation or information,
Mm.
because I
Sure.
I mean, any of the information that you were given was mostly just that. At first, you were probably given information just like me. I had to be given information because I didn't know what life should be, how I should be living my life, what I needed to do, things I should be doing. And then once I started working with others and others worked with me, more importantly, I really started to figure some things out in life.
Sure.
Um, we need each other. We as in human beings, we need each
Right.
other, whether you've got a broken leg and you need someone to help you from point A to point B, a physical therapist who's going to help teach you which movements you need to practice on a regular basis to get the
Mhm.
proper function of your leg or your arm or what have you. I mean, that's what we're here, in my opinion. I think that's what we are here for. I think that's what's made our species this successful in comparison to other species. And it's not just the opposable thumbs. I think it's our sense of community and our willingness to work together, which is an important part of the thriving that has happened thus far in the history of humanity. Where
Right.
that's going, yet to be
Right.
determined, yet to be
Right.
determined. But without other people in my life, I wouldn't be motivated. I know for a fact that if I was left to my own devices, I
Mm,
would not be motivated to accomplish almost any of the things in life that I need to accomplish. Because certain chemicals in my brain changed
mm.
from alcohol abuse
Right.
over years of doing that to myself. So my brain changed, and luckily for me, I've had plenty of time now for the chemicals to find a homeostasis, sort of a regular baseline again. But I personally need motivation that it's difficult to get without other
Mm,
people. So
mm.
having other people to help me, having practices that I instill on myself are definitely very important. And it seems like that's something that whether it's aphasia or alcoholism or types of trauma that I wouldn't want to speak out of my experience, but I'm starting to believe that if a person with half a brain can recover from such a devastating disease, which removed that had half their brain removed as a result, can live a fulfilling life. I think anyone can.
Amazing.
It really is amazing. But the practice, that was four. Practice was 4 out of 5 of the rules.
Right.
Actually getting through this recovery process, right? I mean,
Right. It's like anything. If you want to learn a new language, a whole lot of practice. Motivated enough to do it for the first time, and then a lot of practice. Yeah, and a lot of work that goes into that.
a lot of work. Sometimes I feel like my work's never done. So if there's something that you want to work on or want to improve, it's almost like this is your life now.
Yeah, that's what it is. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. You have to be motivated. You have to practice. That's how the brain works. Yeah, well, we'll have to see in the future what AI and these other things will do in the future in terms of what we are or aren't able to come to the realization that it does still requires you to do all that practice, not somebody else basically giving you a script. Say, yeah, this is the answer. Well, you don't know how to get to that answer unless you work at understanding it, how it works in the brain. So we'll see what happens in our future when people
Hmm.
do other things that might very well be robbing your ability to do the practice work that is required, the effort that's required, the neurological effort that's required to move and create new brain matter. Because that's what it is when it comes to memory, when it comes to new skill, whatever those skills might be, it is no more nor less than the creation of additional brain matter. And that requires effort. So I'm looking forward, and I'm not looking forward, but I know going in the future, um, uh, we're going to still need that kind of effort to climb that mountain. And if somebody tells you, "Oh, you don't have to take mountains; everything is flat. We're going to give you what you need," then I think we're in a different kettle of fish, as it were.
That is fascinating. That is definitely going to be quite the journey. Tom, I think what you just touched on right there is something that is really, really important. More important than most people are probably realizing because of how, just like you had described, how the brain grows brain matter in response to practicing and learning new things and making new connections, new branches and leaves. But the answers are just being given to us. The effort is less and less. You're right. A little bit scary, and it really puts the responsibility in our own hands, I think, for most people.
Well, it does up until the point that I'll say, well, especially young people, because they're growing up, unfortunately, being told that these things are good for you, which they have been up to a point. They don't realize that what older people have gone through, done the effort that was required, not even knowing. Most of us don't even know how the brain works, so I didn't know. But knowing that these quote effort These cognitive activity provides the effort that's required to grow new brain matter. When you're younger and you get they from almost from birth, they get their own iPhone, they get their own various machines, AI is coming, and they're going to be provided literally on a silver platter. You need to become a researcher. Just ask us the question, we'll give you the answer. Now, if you maybe you can memorize them, but being able to come to that same answer when there isn't a machine in front of you, right? Then, quote, you haven't learned. And to learn, you have to put in the effort because it's the effort that makes the brain actually make new brain matter. So, yeah, I'm very worried about any number of things, education obviously on the top of it, and
Mhm.
AI right there too, for those very reasons. But the kids, I think they're not even going to know. I mean, I've met other people that I've read about it too, but I've asked them, "When's the last time you read a book?" I don't read anymore. I don't read books. I read off of my phone or off of what the text is here in front of me. So, how do you read about plasticity? You know,
Right,
they go, and I just find out what it is here. Well,
right.
you know, I said,
Well,
"Have you ever read William James?" I've done this before, and they go, "No, I think I've heard of it. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't." 1800s. I said, "Well, he's written many, many books. One of them is 1,200 pages. Have you ever read a 1,200-page book?" No, 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 no. Said, "Well, that's where you first hear about plasticity from a guy who wrote it a long time ago, actually a long time ago, 1910, I think is when he published that book. Um, Chapter 4 of that huge book talks about plasticity. It's the first time it's been used that way. And these folks in the medical world, these are young kids, but they just don't know what that is. Again, using that as an example of where effort comes from, how it happens, and if you don't get the effort that comes because somebody else gives it to you on a silver platter, you know, we're in trouble, I'm
yeah.
afraid.
I think something that's good to recognize that was a problem with my awakening, I guess you could say, is I realized that at a certain point, if I knew better, then I would do better. When I look back to my perspective or certain value hierarchies that I held in my philosophies in life and just the way I would kind of do things, I realized that I didn't even think a certain way before X event versus after X event.
Mhm.
So the way I thought about things, the way I even went about handling certain situations was different. And the only excuse, for lack of a better word, that I can give myself is I just didn't know. I didn't get it. I didn't understand. So it's gonna be tough because the way of the world is changing in that respect. But I think that maybe people like yourself and others who have the knowledge and the wisdom to share can help the rest of us kind of know better and do better moving forward, which is what we're doing right here is all about.
Yeah, that is true.
It's awesome.
We'll have another interview in the future about other things not to do with stroke and aphasia, but to do with the world and the problems we have that
Mhm,
are going to only get worse until we figure out an awful lot more. And
mhm.
even then, it'll still get worse.
Well, I definitely look forward to that. I would love to have more conversations with you about these kinds of things. I think there's a lot of shadows we could shed some lights on together, and
Right.
it's awesome. Really, really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
And with that, I want to say thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today and to be a guest on the Gross Minute. This was really exciting for me. I've enjoyed all of our conversations prior to this one, and I look forward to having many more with you after this one, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you very much.